What if I told you that inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, two of the most disciplined figures in the royal family have quietly joined hands, and the woman they've set their sights on has no idea just how deep the reckoning goes? Not a scandal. Not a leak. Something far more precise. A slow, surgical reshaping of the monarchy itself, engineered by Princess Anne and Prince William, aimed at one target with one purpose. And at the center of the storm stands Queen Camilla, facing what insiders are calling her darkest days in over a decade. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how Anne and William built their quiet alliance, what they discovered in the palace archives, and why Camilla's future inside the House of Windsor may never look the same again. Before we go any further, hit subscribe, because this story is unraveling in real time, and you don't want to miss what comes next. The date is late spring 2026. Somewhere inside the private wing of Buckingham Palace, past the Queen's audience room, past the long corridor of portraits that stare down at every footstep, a small door opens into a room most of the country doesn't know exists. Inside, a woman in her mid-70s sits alone with a stack of files. No aides, no secretary, no press officer hovering nearby. Just Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the woman the British public has long called the hardest working royal in the family, quietly turning pages that haven't been opened in nearly 3 decades. The files in front of her belong to a name the palace has spent years trying to soften, to reshape, to reframe. Diana, Princess of Wales. And what Anne is reading, according to sources close to the family, is beginning to change everything. To understand what's happening now, you have to understand what came before. You have to understand who Anne is. Not the caricature, not the stern, no-nonsense princess the tabloids love to paint. The real Anne. The one who watched her brother's marriage crumble in slow motion. The one who, in the summer of 1997, stood at the edge of a family gathering and heard the news of Diana's death delivered in a phone call that reportedly went silent for nearly a minute. The one who, according to longtime royal watchers, never fully accepted the way the institution moved on afterward. Anne rarely speaks about Diana in public. She never has. But those who've worked alongside her for decades say she carried something with her from those years. A kind of quiet, unresolved weight. A sense that certain wrongs were papered over instead of addressed. And now, at 75 years old with her brother on the throne and her nephew standing next in line, that weight appears to have found a purpose. Because Anne is not doing this alone. Across London, at Kensington Palace, Prince William has been making moves of his own. Small at first, almost invisible. A reshuffling of Duchy of Cornwall priorities here. A quiet redirection of funding there. Charitable partnerships suddenly reappearing that had been dormant since the late 90s. Homelessness initiatives. HIV and AIDS awareness programs. Landmine survivor foundations. Every single cause Diana had championed in her final years. And every single one now being amplified through the vast machinery of the duchy, an estate worth over £1 billion, generating tens of millions in annual revenue, and answerable in practical terms to William alone. Think about that for a moment. The Duchy of Cornwall isn't a charity. It isn't a discretionary fund. It's a private empire spanning 52,000 hectares across 23 counties. A financial engine that has bankrolled the Prince of Wales for centuries. And William, quietly, methodically, is turning that engine into something Diana herself would have recognized. Something that carries her fingerprint. Something that erases, piece by piece, the influence that others have spent 20 years trying to embed. And the others in this story have a name. A name the palace has worked tirelessly to elevate. A name that now, for the first time in years, looks vulnerable. Camilla. For decades, Queen Camilla has been the great rehabilitation project of the modern monarchy. From the woman the British public once loathed to the wife crowned beside a king, her transformation was carefully engineered. New charities, new patronages, new tiaras pulled from the vault, new portraits commissioned, a whole team of advisors dedicated to reshaping public memory. And for a long time it worked. Polls softened, Coverage warmed. The men in gray, as they've been called for generations, did their job. But here's the thing. Reputations built on management can be dismantled by exposure. And what Anne is reportedly reading in those archives, what William is quietly executing through the duchy, is not a smear campaign. It isn't a leak. It isn't a headline. It's something far more dangerous to a woman in Camilla's position. It's a correction of the record. Stay with this, because this is where the story shifts. According to those monitoring the internal dynamics of the family, Anne's review of the archives began not out of curiosity, but out of a request. A request that came from William himself, months earlier, over a private lunch at Anmer Hall in the quiet weeks after the Christmas holidays. What was said in that meeting has never been reported, but what happened afterward is documented in the movement of files, the requisition of records, the quiet reassignment of two long-serving palace archivists to a project that has no official name and no listed budget. The subject of that project, insiders say, is the years between 1992 and 1997. The final chapter of Diana's life. The letters she wrote. The people she trusted. The names she recorded in her own hand. And somewhere in those pages, according to a source who has spoken cautiously to royal watchers, is material that directly touches on Camilla's influence during that period. Not tabloid speculation. Not recycled gossip. First-hand accounts written by Diana herself, preserved in the palace's own archive, sealed for reasons that are now being quietly reconsidered. Ask yourself something. What does it mean when the institution that spent 30 years suppressing a woman's voice suddenly has two of its most senior members reading her words with fresh eyes? What does it mean when the son she raised, now second in line to the throne, has both the authority and the resources to act on what he finds? And what does it mean for the woman crowned beside her ex-husband? The woman who watched Diana's memory be slowly softened into a manageable narrative when that narrative starts to unravel. It means, according to those close to the situation, that Camilla is entering the most fragile period of her tenure as queen. If you've made it this far, hit that like button, because what comes next is the part the palace has been trying hardest to contain. The pressure isn't public. Not yet. That's what makes it different. There have been no interviews, no documentaries, no leaked memos splashed across the front pages. Instead, the pressure is structural. It's institutional. It's the kind of pressure that only people who understand how the monarchy actually functions can apply. Consider what William has done in just the last 18 months. The Duchy of Cornwall has quietly reallocated significant resources toward mental health initiatives, a cause Diana championed long before it became fashionable. Homelessness partnerships, particularly with the Charity Passage, which Diana famously took a young William to visit in 1993, have been dramatically expanded. Support for survivors of landmines, the very cause that led Diana to walk through an active minefield in Angola in January 1997, has been renewed with new international partnerships. Every one of these moves is publicly framed as William honoring his mother. And every one of them, whether stated or not, sidelines the charitable ecosystem that Camilla had painstakingly built around herself. Because here's what few people outside the palace understand. In the modern monarchy, charity work is power. It's how relevance is built. It's how public affection is earned. It's how legacy is secured. And when the heir to the throne, with the largest private estate in the family behind him, begins pouring resources into one woman's memory while quietly ignoring another woman's portfolio, the message doesn't need to be spoken. Everyone in the palace hears it. Camilla, according to sources familiar with her recent movements, has heard it too. Those who have seen her in recent months describe a woman who is composed but visibly weary. Public appearances continue. Duties are performed. The famous smile is deployed at every ribbon cutting and hospital opening. But behind closed doors, insiders say, the mood is tense. Meetings that used to run smoothly now include long silences. Requests for information that were once granted immediately now come back delayed. Staff who have served both the king and queen for years are reportedly beginning to recalibrate, quietly aware that the center of gravity in the family is shifting. And Charles, for all his authority as monarch, appears unable to counter it. That's the extraordinary part of this story. The king, 77 years old, still managing his health, still balancing the demands of the crown, is watching his sister and his son execute a strategy he cannot openly oppose. Because to oppose it would be to defend Camilla against Diana. And that is a battle no British monarch, in the current climate, can win. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means for a king to sit at the head of his own family and understand that the two people closest to him in blood, his sister and his firstborn, have aligned themselves around a memory he spent years trying to move past. Not out of malice, not out of revenge, but out of something quieter and far more permanent, a conviction that the institution owes Diana a debt that has never been paid. And Anne, of all people, is the one enforcing the collection. Those who know Anne describe her as the most institutionally loyal member of the family. She does not leak. She does not brief journalists. She does not court public sympathy. Her weapon, her whole life, has been duty, and that is precisely why her involvement in this quiet reformation carries so much weight. Because when Anne moves, she doesn't move for gossip. She moves for the institution itself. And what she appears to have decided in the twilight of her 7th decade is that the institution has drifted from something essential. Something Diana understood long before the palace did, that the monarchy cannot survive on management alone. It has to mean something. The scenes described by those close to the family in recent weeks are almost cinematic in their restraint. A meeting in a private drawing room at Windsor. Anne seated on one side, William on the other, a folder between them containing what one source called materials of a sensitive nature. No aides. No secretaries. The door closed for over 2 hours. When they emerged, neither said a word to the staff waiting outside. Anne left for Gatcombe Park that same evening. William returned to Kensington. And within days, according to insiders, 2 specific patronages long associated with Camilla began quietly transitioning, with new co-patrons named, new funding streams announced, and new public appearances scheduled that did not include her. None of this was framed as a demotion, none of it made the papers. That's the whole point. The reshaping of Camilla's role inside the family is not happening in the tabloids. It is happening in the calendar, in the guest lists, in the seating charts, in the small, deliberate decisions that determine who stands next to whom on the Buckingham Palace balcony, and whose name appears first in the court circular, and whose charity gets the royal patronage that comes with £100,000 of media coverage. And in every one of those decisions, Camilla's position is quietly, patiently, being contained. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Because the goal, according to those who understand what Anne and William are actually doing, is not revenge. It is not humiliation. It is not the destruction of Camilla or the erasure of her legacy. If it were, the strategy would be entirely different. There would be leaks. There would be interviews. There would be a public reckoning designed to punish. Instead, what Anne and William appear to be building is something far more lasting. A legacy. A restoration. A version of the monarchy in which Diana's values, her instincts, her way of connecting with the public are woven back into the institution's DNA, not as a memorial, not as a tribute, as an operating principle, which means if the strategy succeeds, Diana will have won something the palace spent 30 years trying to prevent. She will have shaped the monarchy from beyond the grave, not through scandal, not through her sons alone, but through the quiet cooperation of the very sister-in-law who once stood at the edge of that troubled family, watching, waiting, remembering, and Camilla, in the end, will not be destroyed. She will simply be diminished, reduced from the woman who reshaped the crown to the woman who now shares it with a ghost with better instincts, a ghost with a stronger claim on the public's heart, a ghost whose story is finally being told not by the tabloids, not by her brother, not by her sons in interviews from California, but by the institution itself, in its own archives, on its own terms. Stay with this, because the deeper meaning of what's happening now is only starting to come into focus. For years, royal analysts have argued that the monarchy runs on two currencies: ceremony and sentiment. Ceremony, the palace controls. Sentiment, it has always struggled with. Diana understood sentiment in a way no royal before her ever had. And when she died, the institution made a calculation. It would honor her publicly, cautiously, at a distance, while quietly steering the family in a direction that emphasized continuity over emotion, tradition over intimacy, management over meaning. Camilla, whether she intended to or not, became the human embodiment of that calculation. Not the villain of it. The face of it. What Anne and William are now doing, in their careful, coordinated way, is undoing that calculation. And they are doing it at a moment when the public appetite for authenticity has never been higher, when trust in institutions has never been lower, and when the memory of Diana, 29 years after her death, is stronger than the palace ever imagined it would be. The men in gray, those unnamed advisors who have run the palace for generations, are reportedly divided. Some see the shift as necessary, a long overdue rebalancing of the family's public image. Others see it as dangerous, an implicit rebuke of King Charles that could destabilize the reign of a monarch whose health is already a matter of quiet concern. Staff who have worked in the palace for decades say they have never seen this particular alignment before. An heir and a princess, coordinating without conflict, moving without public credit, executing a vision that neither of them will ever be able to publicly claim. That is the most powerful part of this story. Anne will never give an interview about it. William will never write a book about it. There will be no memoir, no documentary, no press conference. The reshaping of the monarchy in Diana's image will be, by design, invisible in its execution and undeniable in its results. And Camilla, watching from her private apartments, will see it happen slowly, month by month, decision by decision, ceremony by ceremony, until one day she looks around and realizes that the institution she married into has quietly become something she no longer defines. Insiders describe one recent moment that has stayed with those who witnessed it. A small gathering at Windsor Castle. Camilla arrives, greets the assembled guests, and takes her usual place beside the king. Across the room, Anne stands with William. They do not look at Camilla. They do not need to. The conversation flows around her in a way that is polite, correct, and utterly without warmth. One longtime observer described it as the coldest room I have ever felt in that palace. Not hostile, not dramatic, just quiet. The kind of quiet that tells you a decision has already been made, and you were not consulted. Camilla, according to those close to her, has begun asking questions in private that she never used to ask. Questions about her long-term role. Questions about her patronages. Questions about what happens if Charles's health forces a step back sooner than anticipated. Questions that, for years, had answers that felt secure. And now, don't. And in the middle of all of this, a small detail that has stayed with those who've heard it. A source recounted a conversation in which Camilla, speaking to a trusted friend, said quietly of the shift she was witnessing, "He didn't even tell me himself." 6 words. Unattributed, unconfirmed, impossible to verify, but heavy with everything they suggest. A woman who has spent a lifetime navigating the palace, who fought her way from public disgrace to a crown, now discovering that the most important decisions about her future are being made in rooms she is not invited into. By people who share her surname. In service of a woman who has been dead for nearly 3 decades. Think about that for a moment, because whatever you feel about Camilla, whatever you feel about Diana, whatever you feel about the entire long and painful saga of this family, that single sentence contains the whole meaning of what's happening now. Power in the House of Windsor is shifting, and it is shifting toward a memory the palace once thought it had safely buried. The consequences of this shift will play out for years. Royal watchers already predict that by the end of the decade, William's accession, whenever it comes, will look nothing like Charles's. The tone will be different. The priorities will be different. The public face of the monarchy, in ways both subtle and profound, will carry Diana's imprint more visibly than it has at any point since her death. And Anne, if she is still active in the family's inner circle, will be widely understood by those who paid attention as one of the quiet architects of that transformation. Camilla's place in that future is uncertain. She will remain queen. Her title cannot be revoked. But titles, in the modern monarchy, are only half of what matters. The other half is influence. And influence, once it begins to drain away, is nearly impossible to reclaim. The palace that built its entire identity on control is no longer controlling its own house. The institution that spent 30 years shaping Diana's memory is now being reshaped by it. And the two figures leading that reshaping, a 75-year-old princess and a 43-year-old prince, have done it without a single press release, without a single leaked memo, without a single confrontation that the public was ever meant to see. That is the story of what's happening inside the House of Windsor right now. Not a scandal, not a war, a reckoning. Quiet, patient, and if the pattern holds, permanent. But there's one more person we haven't talked about yet, someone whose name has stayed strangely absent from these private meetings, whose role in the coming chapter may be larger than anyone has yet realized, and whose reaction to what Anne and William are building could either accelerate this transformation or blow it wide open. The story is far from over. The pieces are still moving, and the next revelation, according to those watching this family most closely, may be the one that finally forces the palace to say out loud what it has spent years trying to keep unspoken. If you've made it this far, hit like, because stories like this don't stay buried for long, and the people who told them once thought they never would be told at all. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because when the next piece of this puzzle drops, and it will drop, you'll want to be here to see the moment the whole picture finally comes into view. Somewhere inside Buckingham Palace tonight, a light is still on in a small private room. A woman in her 70s is still turning pages, and history, quietly, patiently, is being rewritten one sentence at a time.